Welcome back, everybody. Some of you may be wondering where I've been, and to answer that question, I've been taking a much-needed hiatus from the game, as well as doing the thing we all love to do, which is play Minecraft with friends. But now that I'm finally back, I can get something off of my chest that I've been wanting to get off for a long time. I hate Kewl Tune. I despise Kewl Tune. I despise how the deck is designed. I despise everything that the deck does, that it stands for, that it means, and I despise playing against the deck. Look, I've lived through Snake Eyes, I've lived through Tyr, I've lived through Kashtira, I've lived through the prime days of Runic Sun where we all had 3 floodgates. I've lived through Branded where they were puppet locking, they were locking you out of the game entirely, and every single one of those decks is more fun than Kewl Tune, because against Kewl Tune, when I sit down against the opponent, when I look my opponent in the eyes and he goes, Rotary Reveal Q, I start thinking, dang, if I were to switch my faith to Christianity right now, at least when I die of goddamn boredom, I'll go to hell and I'll get to see back-to-back burning in the fucking pits of fire next to me. And also, that wouldn't matter at all because Q would summon it back next turn. Anyhow, let's get straight into the Kewl Tune problem. Number one is every card except Rotary, right? We can talk about Rotary later, but every single card in this deck except Rotary does 3 things too many. Q is able to summon from anywhere. It's able to summon from deck, graveyard. Like a deck and graveyard. That's ridiculous. That's 2 places too many. All of these cards except Q have this condition where if they're special summoned, they just get to add a free card to hand. Every Kewl Tune card has minimum 3 effects. 1, the condition that it can be used as a synchro material from hand. 2, the ability to do something when it's used for a synchro summon. And 3, the ability to search or tutor or grab another Kewl Tune card as soon as it's played. JJ, like every card does just 1 too many things, so that the entire Kewl Tune engine is just absurdly consistent. Kewl Tune Synchro is a twice per turn card, which means that, every Kewl Tune Synchro is always live all the time. And this, coupled with a bunch of random generic synchro support like overtuning, Duelist Genesis, Synchro Overtake, makes Kewl Tune just this absurdly consistent, impossible to interact with main deck, where every card just does 3 things too many. Clip is a quick effect for a godforsaken reason that can go on my turn as well, right? Like for some reason this deck was given a turn 0, it rarely ever comes up because Clip is a garbage card, but it just comes up. Clip is a random banish for whatever reason. Crackle can rip 3 cards out of your extra deck if you're playing that line, which means that decks that are reliant on cards in their extra deck are suddenly unviable for no reason at all. Like, you can't play Lunalight because you're just going to rip 3 Leos, and then you're not going to have a viable game plan for any reason. And then every Kewl Tune extra deck card also does 3 things too many, right? And all of these cards just do 5 more things than they're supposed to, which creates this absurdly frustrating resource loop to deal with, because the base Kewl Tune board of Zaylin Remix has 10 interruptions on it. That means the deck that plays 21 hand traps, has obscene consistency, can play through everything, also just happens to have 10 interactions on their end board. And that doesn't sound so bad, right? 10 interactions, that's dealable with. They're layered interactions. You can probably interact your way out of this, but also in the process of doing those 10 interactions, Trackmaker and Remix just get them infinite follow-up, so you have to kill them that turn, or you have to break their board and establish enough of your own board through 10 interactions that, they can't play the next turn, which is usually really, really difficult. And then that gets us into our second piece, right? Rotary is just an obscenely, stupidly, dumbly unfair card. Because of that, not only will Kewl Tune have 10 interactions, including an Omni Negate, including 2 Omni Negates if you count RS, they will also have this capability to look at your hand during their turn and determine exactly how to use each of those 10 interactions for your 5-card hand. Which means 6-card hand. Unless you have 6 cards that do 6 different things, it becomes ridiculously difficult to interact with your opponent at all, because so much of being able to go second in this game is a push and pull of unknown information, right? You have knowns in your hand, you know what's in your hand, and your opponent doesn't know what's in your hand. So they are forced to conserve heavy interaction like Zaylin for choke points, and you can use this to your advantage to bait out those interactions before you get to those choke points, or use those choke points to bait out interactions so that you could resolve something else. But as soon as they're able to see your hand, this dynamic changes. They know exactly when, where, how they have to negate, such that, they just never have to think about what's unknown, because there are no unknowns in your hand. They stack your deck so they know the 6 card. They know all 5 cards during every single variation of their mainline combo, right? There's just no world in which you play against a Kewl Tune opponent and they have an end board and they have not gone through Rotary yet. And then after all of that, after a card that does every single thing in the game when it's used as synchro material, it also grants them an extra normal summon, so it's an extender. Not only that, But also, just in case your opponent wanted to counterplay Rotary by setting the cards in their hand on their turn 1, Rotary also has a second effect to put a card from your opponent's graveyard back into their deck, so that decks like Branded, decks like Rollout, decks that require cards in their graveyard are now being interacted with by a card that already does everything going first. It needed a going second effect too. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. Rotary is one of the most custom cards to ever custom cards. And again, I lived in an era of X-Rise. I lived in an era of Poplar. I lived in an era of Habakiri, and yet when I look at Rotary, this is 3 effects on a card, and they're all absurdly good effects. If any of these effects were not present on the card, Kewl Tune would be a significantly worse deck for it, right? Like, if you couldn't put back cards with Rotary, you couldn't play against Branded as well, therefore Branded would be a better deck in the format, which would make for a more interesting format, because one of these decks is a functional FTK, which is Kewl Tune. Oh my gosh. And then we get into part 3, which is like, you can't really hand trap the Kewl Tune deck at all. Despite the deck being able to play a copious amount of hand traps, unlike decks like Snake Eyes, Kewl Tune was just never able to be hand trapped. Like, in Snake Eyes, you would trade hand traps, right? You could trade 1-for-1 interaction. With Kewl Tune, every card just plays through everything, right? Because the effect to use a material from hand is not an effect, it's a condition, that means that cards like Imperm and Veiler do very little against the deck so long as they open another extender. As soon as they Rotary look at your hand, they know everything in your hand. They know every hand trap you've ever had. They know if you're holding a Spark. They know if you're holding an Impulse. And they can establish a Zaylin early to stop the only hand traps that matter, right? And this also, in a way, goes for high impacts too, into Charmies, into every single Charmy, into Meows, into Perulia, into Fulos. This deck is able to play extraordinarily well. It is able to end on 1 or 2 draws and then just end on functionally the full end board because of KTS being a twice per turn. The deck is just able to do everything through every card in the game. And that gets us into part 4. Why don't you just play Breakers, right? And Breakers against Kewl Tune is a time-honored strategy. It kind of works, right? If you show them 3 unbeatable cards in your hand, then you win the game. How are they supposed to establish a board that beats 3 cards that each require an Omni negate if the deck only has 2 Omni negates? Well, 2 things. 1, post side, Kewl Tune is now playing a really cool card called Manadium Reframing. And now what Manadium Reframing does is, in any 2-card Kewl Tune combo, you are able to search for a counter trap card that is active so long as you have a Synchro on board, which is always, okay, let's be clear, you're searching Clip, you have 2 KTS set or 1 KTS set, you are always going to have a Synchro on board. There's never a scenario in which you're not having a Synchro on board. And suddenly, that ups the number of breakers you need from 3 to 4, or like 2 to 3 if it's like quick play breakers, right? If you have a way to interact with the RS outside of the main phase, then the number of breakers you need goes from 2 to 3. And now this would all be like really fine and dandy, right? Like, oh, I just have to draw 3 breakers. Except it's not, right? You can't play breakers in the same quantity that you can ever play hand traps. So even if you breaker the deck, most of the time, you are not going to have the quantity of starters to beat 21 hand traps in their hand. And also, for, again, it's godforsaken reason, Q can search any hand trap. So during the course of this combo in which they are going to reframing you, they can also get an Ash Blossom, or a Bell, or if they're missing that, a Harmonia. So you will have 2 to 3 cards in your 6-card hand, and you will be staring out a board that requires all 3 of your breakers to shatter. And then you will have to try and kill them through 4 to 5 hand traps in hand. And it's just absurd, right? It's obscene that a deck that is able to play so well into breakers is also able to play so well into hand traps, and vice versa. A deck that is able to resist hand traps is also able to resist breakers and able to play an absurd quantity of hand traps. And what it comes down to is Kewl Tune becomes a deck with no weakness. You can't beat it with breakers. You can't beat it with hand traps. So you've created a deck that can just do everything, right? Normally, when a deck is really strong engine, right, their engine is really resilient to hand traps, this comes at the cost of playing more engine, but that's not the case for Kewl Tune. You can just side out half your engine. I think, ultimately, what this means is, like, it's really unfun to try and, like, build against Kewl Tune. It is absurdly unfun to try and build against a deck that does everything, because every time you start deck building, you start thinking, what if I just played the deck that did everything? And now, this isn't to say that Kewl Tune is an unbeatable deck, right? I have achieved results despite Kewl Tune being in the format. I think there's a lot to say about what you can do against Kewl Tune, how you can outplay them, how you can outmaneuver really good players, and it becomes sort of like a puzzle. But it does become frustrating, because most of the time, when you go second against Kewl Tune, when you lose that die roll, and your opponent is a living, breathing human being that has drawn a hand of cards that are playable, you will think, wow, I lose this match. Because as long as they can resolve their combo going first, you have functionally lost the game. And I think number 5 is like the Kewl Tune Mirror is also not fun, right? When you, for some reason, it is 2 decks that are not very good at going second outside of hand traps, right? Both Kewl Tune decks are very reliant on drawing hand traps to win going second against decks that are, Kewl Tune, which are very resilient to hand traps. So every time you see the Kewl Tune Mirror, it usually becomes kind of like just like a hand comparison game. Like you just look at your hand, you look at their hand, you go, oh, well, he can't stop me, I win. Or, oh, yep, he can't stop me, I win. It's a very unfun mirror. And it's a lot of what like top meta mirrors have looked like for a while. It's absurdly unfun to say that, how am I supposed to beat the Kewl Tune Mirror? Oh, you either have to deck build breakers and put yourself into a worse position against FTKs, or you just have to go, well, I better draw, right? Like I better draw better and my opponent better misplay. Like having to put your opponent on misplay to lose the game is always really unfun. It's nothing clever that you do. It's nothing great that you do. It's not any great play that you are able to make to control the game state. It is just, wow, my opponent played better. Or sorry, my opponent played as he was supposed to. He played the game like he wanted to play the game and now he wins. And I think that brings me to my final point, right? Like, how do you really address Kewl Tune in a satisfactory way? How do you deal with Kewl Tune in such a way that it doesn't feel frustrating to play against anymore? And I see a lot of ban lists flying around today that are like, put Rotary to 1, put KTS to 1, decrease the consistency of the deck. And I think this is missing 2 things. 1, you are decreasing the consistency on an absurdly consistent deck. There are more consistency cards they can play. They can play 2 more copies of Duelist Genesis. They can play Overtuning. They can play cards like the Blue Eyes that searches the Rotary. And while this does put them weaker to cards like Droll and cards like maybe 1-for-1 hand traps sometimes, it doesn't really remove the problem of if they go first in combo, they win the game. Because what it does is it removes player agency. It removes the ability to be clever. It removes this ability to play well. There is no interesting point of decision being made at any point. When my opponent looks at my hand, I will no longer have interesting decisions to make. I will no longer have mistakes I can make, because as long as my opponent sequences correctly, they win. And there's no room for them to mess up that sequencing. They know my hand, right? They're muttering my hand the whole time. If there is no room for my opponent to ever make a mistake, if there's no room for me to ever play better, then the game feels absurdly frustrating. And I think to that end, I think we should do with Rotary what we did with Norway, which is just ban it. I think even if Kewl Tune becomes a fairer deck by the limitation of Rotary, I think what Kewl Tune does is not fun for the game. I think looking at your opponent's hand is not in the spirit of what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! So great. I think being able to play clever, being able to bait out mistakes, being able to fish for these mistakes in the long term is what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! So endearingly fun, right? Being able to go second and try and outplay your opponent is what makes it extremely fun. And playing at such a massive disadvantage leads to a lot of unfun game states. So, how do you resolve this? I think we just ban Rotary. I'm tired of ban list predictions that say limit Rotary. I think we ban Rotary and we are done with it. Anyhow, that's it. Alphama video coming soon. That deck sucks too. Ciao. Oh, also, I don't want to hear any mad because bad accusations. 16 in the account Brian Chen, people in the world are allowed to call me bad. If you are one of those 16 people, feel free to leave a comment down below. I take constructive criticism. The rest of you, you can leave a comment down below with constructive criticism. Just know that I will be using my credentials against you in a very insulting fashion. Ciao.